In this lecture, we will be going over kind of a crash course on criminological theories of crime. One important thing I'd like to note to begin with, none of these are trying to explain all types of crimes. When you think about theories of crimes, think about them something like psychological diagnosis. 150 years ago, we had two of them. You were either sane or insane. And for a long time, we were sort of looking at that as in the same way with criminality. You were either criminal or not criminal. But increased understanding and study has shown that there are a lot of reasons why people commit crimes. So we'll look at some of those today. Early criminological theory was heavily focused on determinism, quack science from the 19th century, things like phrenology, looking at the bumps on people's heads to determine what their personality would be like, personality types based on body types, things that just don't hold any kind of scientific water with proper examination. The first real criminological studies were conducted in Chicago by Sean McKay, and they basically looked at the effects of living conditions on people's likelihood to commit crime, and that more people were committing crime in heavily populated, dense urban environments where people that worked lower income jobs, immigrant people that were high residential mobility moving in and out of the area, and as people made more money and could afford better lodging, they would move further away from those areas of the city. But for those that couldn't, that had to stay close to where they worked, they would take any sort of lodging that they could get. Another one of the early theories coming in the 1950s is classical strain theory, basically looking at the interaction between someone's position in society and what their goals are, typically economic goals. Basically says that all people have the same goals. They want to be successful, but how they go about doing that is different. So conformers seek out the goals and also have the means to achieve them. They have the ability to get a college education. They have connections to get a job. Innovators seek out the goals, but don't have those same connections, those same abilities. So they have to innovate ways to get the goals, like selling drugs to make money to pay for college tuition, things like that. Ritualists maybe at one time sought the goals, but now have basically accepted the failure of them and are just sort of getting by. Someone working a dead-end job or working in a position where there's not any opportunities for advancement, these are the ritualists. Next are the retreatists, people that just don't want any part of the goals, don't care about the means, and basically going to go living in a cabin in the woods. Pretty infrequent, but that does happen. There's a really interesting documentary, I don't know if it's still on Netflix or not, about the founder of the Burt's Bees company. It's not Tiger King good, but it's pretty good. You might hear one of my dogs in the background. I believe someone is at my front door. No cause for alarm. The last group are rebels. They are those that don't care about the means, don't care about the goals, and they're just going to do whatever they want. Very criminal group. The criminal groups really are the innovators and the rebels. Also, as you go down the list, it's more and more infrequent. So most people would be conformists, and then fewer innovators, fewer ritualists, fewer retreatists, and fewer rebels. So just looking at how people value the goals of society and how they contextualize that within the means at their disposal. Okay. Some theories that have been built off of that classical strain theory. Two main ones are institutional enemy theory, which is a major focus of the Crime in the American Dream or Social Science the American Crime Problem class that we teach here, where basically that there are elements of society that promote crime, and it's people's responses to those interactions with society that determine their likelihood for committing criminal offenses. If it's very topical with what's going on in the country right now, and I think the class might be required for CJ majors, so I would probably advise anyone to take that. The other type is general strain theory, which basically looks at individuals committing crime and basically their response to individual strains, strains that we all face every day. The main ones they say are failure to achieve goals, removal of positive stimuli, and confronting negative stimuli. So actually doing those things or thinking that those things might happen basically causes people to make bad decisions. So if you think that you bombed a test, and then you go out and get blackout drunk, which you shouldn't do, but that would be a negative response to that. It might be that you got an A on the test and you just thought you did bad, or it might be that you actually did, shit the bed on the test and you didn't do well. But those negative perceptions can oftentimes be just as stressful, as straining as it actually happening. A lot of times we catastrophize things and make them worse in our own minds than they are actually in our lives. I'm going to go back here for a second. A good example of the strain thing, there was an episode of the Nickelodeon program Doug, where he thought he was going to have to eat liver and onions at a social event that he was having. And this perception of facing that negative stimuli led Doug to just make all kinds of terrible decisions over the course of the episode. It's sort of the same thing happening. Sometimes the decisions that we make in response to more serious negative stimuli can even be criminal. The next theory we're talking about is deterrent theory or rational choice theory. Basically, deterrence theory theorizes that criminal activity can be deterred by the presence of punishments. If the punishment is swift, certain, and severe, the benefits are outweighed by the crime. The most important of those factors is that it's certain. If the punishment is severe but it's never imposed, then it's not really effective. So the main thing is that the punishment is going to be certain. Rational choice theory basically says that offenders are committing this sort of hedonistic calculus when they're thinking about committing an offense and weighing the pros and cons. Some cases that's the truth with regards to white collar offending, other types of sort of high profile organized crime. But for the most part, someone that's addicted to drugs or having some other sort of acute mental health issue is not going to be making rational decisions. So this is a good time to focus on what I talked about at the beginning, that not all crime can be explained by one theory. So you have to have different facets of different theories to look at different types of offending. And rational choice theory doesn't have anything really to do with something like crime committed in the throes of being high on PCP, unless you are trying to rationalize the actions of a PCP user, which there's really not any way to do that. Even if someone has experienced using the drug, that doesn't mean that the person taking the drug that they're encountering is going to have the same effects that they had with it. Learning theory, on the other hand, is very applicable to a wide variety of criminal behaviors, really all types of human behaviors. It basically says that learning theory, how people learn to commit crimes, is either through observing other people committing the crimes or by participating in the crimes themselves and sort of learning as they go. To a criminal point, differential association theory says that in addition to learning the behaviors, you also learn why the laws against them are ineffective or inappropriate. So learning theory basically encompasses how we learn all behaviors as humans. So think about how you learn to play video games, or learn to ride a bike, or learn to hit a baseball, or learned how to catch a fish. And anything that you learn to do is going to be based on watching someone else do it, or just doing it yourself and getting better as you go. Life is a YouTube tutorial video. when we're specifically talking about crime, you also have the thing that you learn why the laws against it are ineffective. So in Oliver Twist, he was taught, why it was okay to steal stuff. Or when someone is indoctrinated into a gang, they learn why the police are bad. In a lot of instances, it's not much of a stretch. So if you live in a community where you've had a lot of negative interactions with the police and the citizens, it might be really easy to teach young kids or indoctrinate young kids into the understanding that all police are bad. So it's a very powerful process, learning theory. Neutralization and justification theories basically says that all people are good on some level, and they have to make these neutralizations, these justifications as to why it's okay for them to commit the crimes that they commit. Denial of injury, denial of victim, appeal to higher loyalties, denial of responsibility, condemning the condemners. There's a lot of ways people do this. You may have experienced this in the past, someone giving you some story about why they had to take money from you. Maybe a roommate did this, or maybe a relative, about why they had to do this, or basically just coming up with all these stories. I don't know if it's necessarily directly applicable here, but there's a joke I heard in a television show. It was a police show, and it says, "You want to know the difference between a drunk and a junkie?" It said, "A drunk will steal your wallet and feel like shit about it the next day. A junkie will steal your wallet and help you look for it." Okay, so the stories that people have to justify their behaviors can be very complex, and again, very situationally specific. Control theory is different than the other types of criminological theories because it looks at why people don't commit crimes. It says that the attachment that people have to their social systems, to their job, their religious beliefs, their community beliefs, their family, prevents them from committing crimes. If you don't have those social bonds, then you're more likely to commit crime, which we see a lot. We see because crime can be beneficial, you can gain monetary success, you can gain romantic success, economic success through crime. They can be very beneficial. So if you don't have these checks on your behavior, then it is possible for someone to make a decision that they might not make if they had those other connections in their lives. The self-control theory basically says that your level of self-control dictates a lot of the decision-making processes that you go through. So if you have high self-control, you're more likely to make good decisions. If you have low self-control, you're more likely to make bad decisions. It's a pretty simple process. The problem that I personally have with the theory is that the theory says that level is set very early, like age 5 or 6, and that level is going to be set for the rest of your life, which I don't feel is appropriate in most cases. I feel like people change over the course of their lives, so that this theory, in the way that it's currently constructed, I don't necessarily agree with very much. But the process of having low self-control, meaning you're more likely to commit crimes, is accurate. That does happen. You're also more likely to be the victim of a crime because you're engaging in high-risk behaviors. Another theory that sort of integrates with some of the other ones in terms of why crimes happen is social disorganization theory. So something like control theory, you're going to be less likely to have those controlling bonds if you live in a socially disorganized environment. It's looking at, places with high residential mobility, kind of going back to some of the Sean McKay stuff. High residential mobility, you don't know your neighbors. People that live there aren't there a lot because they're having to work 2 jobs, having to take public transit back and forth, losing more time in the neighborhood. And it really prevents a lot of community cohesion, which would potentially reduce crime. If people are looking out for one another, looking out for one another's property, for their things, then there's more effective guardianship on that area. To that point, another type of theory that looks specifically at why individual crimes happen is routine activities theory. It says when 3 things occur in time and place, a crime is likely to occur. Where you have a motivated offender, absence of a capable guardian, and the availability of a suitable target. Okay, if those things occur, then the crime is likely to take place. There are a lot of motivated offenders. There are a lot of suitable targets. People have to go to, if there's a bus stop, people have to go to the bus stop. You can't get on the bus, but at the bus stop. You can't get on the train, but at the train stop. So the motivated offenders, if you think about them as kind of like predators in a nature show, they know where people have to go. The bus stop, the train stop is the watering hole. So they know where they have to go. So now you have to address the thing of capable guardians. Whether that's people in the neighborhood, whether that's police officers, whether that's security cameras. That's the main linchpin of when that's not there, because there are going to be motivated offenders and there are going to be suitable targets. So it's keeping guardianship over those suitable targets that helps prevent the crime. And it's important to note too, and I should have said this at the beginning, two very important things that criminal theories are supposed to do are explain why a crime happens and offer some kind of solution as to ways to address that. So in this situation, increasing the availability of capable guardians is a way to address this type of crime. Conflict theory is based on that sort of conflict versus consensus model that we talked about in terms of crime creation. Conflict theory says that those in power use that power to affect control over the people that are not in power. So we make things illegal to control people that aren't in power. Early laws prohibiting the use of marijuana. Some of the first laws in the United States against that were in El Paso. They weren't necessarily targeting the behavior because the behavior was new and wasn't really understood. What they were targeting was a behavior that was commonly associated with Mexican nationals, Mexican immigrants, Mexican Americans. So they couldn't make it illegal to be of Mexican heritage or culture in El Paso, but they could make it illegal to smoke marijuana, and that was a common tool that police used to, and police and politicians, people in power used to invoke control over people in that area. Same thing has happened with the war on drugs, and with we talked about in Atlanta, where 93% of the people arrested for marijuana possession were African American males. So they realized that this was happening. They realized that they were operating under this conflict model, and then they addressed that. So it's been used in the past as a way for people to take power and hold power, but hopefully with everything that's happening now, that won't be the coolest thing to do in the future. Helping people and avoiding these scenarios where you have a conflict system in place might be better, and operating under a consensus model might be better. All right. This is a breakdown of how that process happens, the definition of the crime, formation of the criminal definitions, the application of the criminal definitions, labeling people as crime, development of the behavior patterns in terms of monitoring the people, observing the behaviors, construction of the criminal concepts, the punishments, the trials, and things like that. And then people see that, and then it becomes a crime. The marijuana laws in this country, once sort of the dust settles, maybe in 10 or 15 years, are a really good example of this. And I've studied this a lot in school, and since I just had a book come out last year about marijuana laws. It's gone on a roller coaster. Initially, people didn't know what it was, and then you have reefer madness in the 1930s, and everybody's freaking out. There are much more powerful drugs come out a little bit, in time later. It becomes this sort of like rebellious thing. It's incorporated into music. Certain cultures accept it more than others. And now we see the laws changing back. So we've gone over this whole like rubber band roller coaster over the last 100 years, from a conflict model morphed into a consensus model, and now the consensus model is swinging back the other way. So it's interesting to see how the perceptions change, how beliefs change, and how laws change.